Well, thank you all again for joining us for the Critical Mixed Methods workshop. We are here with Monica Johnson to learn a little bit more about this topic and dive in and see how it might apply to your own research and work. So that's all I'm going to say. Welcome everybody. I'm going to turn it over to Monica.
Thank you. Welcome everyone. So we're here at the Critical Mixed Methods workshop, the imperative for critical inquiry and reflexivity in research. My name is Monica Hernandez Johnson, and I'm going to go ahead and say hi just because it's awkward and rude to not say hi as well. I'm from the Department of Educational Psychology, Leadership, and Higher Education. I'm currently a PhD candidate and defending next month. So I'm really excited about that. And what a wonderful opportunity to also be able to share with fellow graduate students some of the work that my focus really has been on throughout my academic journey here at UNLV. I do want to say that I also have my amazing advisor, Dr. Lisa Dixon, in the call here. So she always has such great perspectives, and we've had the opportunity to be able to teach multiple mixed methods courses, advanced mixed methods. So I'm very thankful for her as well. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started and really look at this CMMR. So it's Critical Mixed Methods Research. It really incorporates critical inquiry and reflexivity in the research process. And that's to encourage researchers to have social justice-based work. So what we're gonna do is we're also gonna provide a brief overview of mixed methods if that is needed. So we're gonna get a little feel of the room to see what your familiarity is with mixed methods. It's not necessary whatsoever. I will be happy to cover some of the basic designs. So what we hope is that by the end of this workshop, you'll be able to understand the principles and significance of critical mixed methods research, which stems from mixed methods research, that you're able to use reflexive skills to analyze how your identity and positionality shape your research, explore strategies for integrating critical theoretical frameworks into our designs, examine approaches for effectively integrating qualitative and quantitative data to ensure meaningful and equitable representations of findings, and lastly, to identify pathways to disseminate research findings for actionable social change and DEIJ advocacy. With that, this is a workshop, so if there is ever a point where you don't understand something or if you have a question, please feel free to let me know. And virtually, obviously, Alyssa, I'm very thankful for Alyssa here in the grad college as well. I want to start off by saying I'm very thankful to be a part of the UNLV community. I think that this type of research is especially pertinent, being both a research-intensive institution as well as a minority-serving institution. So I'm very thankful for the college. So, a brief agenda for today will be, again, in order for us to be able to meet the objectives for this workshop is to really go over mixed methods. We're going to start off with obviously an introduction and then cover selected phases of the CMMR framework. There's 11 phases. I don't believe we'll be able to cover them all. I'll be able to summarize the phases. But what I'm going to do is really hone in on some of the phases, so that way you can get an opportunity to be able to discuss, even do some hopefully prompting, reflection prompting, that allows you to be able to write down some of the work relating to positionality, relating to critical frameworks, the knowledge that we validate. Whether it be in our departments, whether it be in academia, whether it be as a society, right? So an opportunity for you to really think about. Obviously, CMMR really focuses in on reflexivity, so that's going to be a part of what we use today to engage in activities. And then lastly, a time for Q&A. So with that, let's see who's here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask you to please introduce yourself, your names, share your pronouns if you're comfortable, the college department that you're from, and your class standing. So again, I'm Monica Hernandez Johnson, go by she or hers, Department of Educational Psychology, if you're a PhD candidate student. And what I'll do is maybe virtually, if you'd like to just chat, but write in the chat name and the following prompts here, that would be great, and we can see who's there. And what I'll do is start off in the as well as for those that are physically here. So, how about?
Hi, I am Michelle Isaac, she, her pronouns. I am in Lee Business School, just transferred here from CSN UNLV as a marketing major. What is class standing?
Are you first year, second year?
Oh, I don't know what year I'm in.
You just transferred over, so.
I transferred over, but I switched majors quite a bit, so.
It's okay. Very happy to have you. One more time, Michelle.
Michelle, yeah.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you for being here.
My name's Chris Miguel, pronouns he, they. I'm in the College of Education, Department of Teaching and Learning, and I'm finishing my second year as a PhD student, and I'm hopefully graduating next spring.
Nice. I'm so happy that you're here. Thank you very much, Chris.
Yeah, my name is Keiko, and my pronouns is she and her. And I'm in also teaching and learning, and I'm in a master's degree program. And my class standing, I'm graduating this semester. Yeah.
Oh, congratulations. Keiko?
Keiko.
Keiko. Very nice to meet you. Oh, congratulations. We'll be in the hopefully same graduation ceremony then. That's awesome.
And we have many introductions online. Would you like me to just read through?
Whatever you.
So we have Ambrosia Daphne Solis, she, her, hers, University of California, Riverside School of Education, Educational Policy and Analysis and Leadership in her second year. We have Amruta, School of Public Health, third year PhD. Dr. Benedictson provided an introduction as well, thank you. We have Erin Andrew, she, her, School of Nursing, first year, second semester PhD Nursing in Clinical Research. Monica Sorensen, she, hers, PhD in Ed Psych, second semester. We have Sarah Benson, third year PhD student in Sociology Department. Jennifer Tidwell, College of Hospitality, second year grad student. Ruta is a quantitative research approach currently. We have Linnea from the Department of Psychology, second year PhD student. We have Kirsten from the School of Public Policy, PhD candidate. A few more. We have Jillian, College of Education, Teaching and Learning. Ana Reyes, College of Education, Educational Psychology doctoral program, who is in the final stages of their program, hoping to adopt CMMR approach for her dissertation. And then we have Joseph Castellanos, who is in College of Education, Cultural Studies, International Education, Multicultural Education, JD focused PhD. And then we've got Andre Dixon from PhD in Sociology, studying multiracial racial identity formation and racial identity management process. And last but not least, we have Veronica McVoy, second year PhD student in Ed Psych, College of Education, hoping to graduate soon.
Thank you, Liz. That really helps me. Thank you. I'm seeing who's in the room. I won't ask many chat questions, so don't worry. I'm gonna put it up for discussion so you don't have to read too much. Perfect. Thank you everybody for sharing. And what I do want to do, just a hands up, or you could just react to what I'm about to ask you. I wanted to ask what is your level of familiarity with mixed methods research? So if you know the basics, or how should I ask this question? Yeah, maybe that is the way to go about it. Do you have a basic familiarity with mixed methods research? If you do, please raise your hands. If you don't, it's okay. It's not necessary for this workshop, but just raise your hands. Thank you if you have some.
A few, at least 4 hands raised on Zoom.
Okay, perfect. All right, thank you very much for that. We'll go ahead and proceed with an icebreaker. So what I want you to do, awesome. What I want you to do is think about your research identity. Now, this is something that's not really in literature just yet. Hopefully by the time I get done with my dissertation, it will be. Your research identity. We know about science identity, and that is the science identity model goes into, for example, how you feel like a scientist. Do you feel like a scientist when you get recognized as a scientist, when you are doing scientific work, when you're involved in scientific experiments, and you're incorporated in the scientific community, right? When we talk about research identity, which is my focus, it's more about what does it mean to be a researcher? So what I want you to do is we're gonna go ahead and split up into maybe groups of threes, definitely because we're here. So group of three here, and hopefully we can do the same with the groups of three. I could see here, anywhere from 2 to 4 is fine. And what I want you to do is I want you to write down one word that describes your current research approach. This could be a qualitative researcher, quantitative researcher, justice-focused qualitative researcher, a mixed methodologist, right? Just think about one word. How would you describe yourself as a researcher? You might have not thought about this question before, but and that's completely fine. I want you to go ahead and when you have that, when you get placed into a group, I want you to just begin to talk about why did you choose that word? How do you see your role as a researcher? And have you ever considered how your identity influences your research? So we're just gonna take a few minutes for that. I love that, a practical researcher. So we're gonna take a few minutes to both think about the question and then discuss it within your group. Those 3 questions that follow. Why did you choose that word? How do you see your role? How do you see your role as a researcher? And have you ever considered how your identity influences your research? And it looks like Alyssa.
I'm ready to send them.
Perfect. We'll be opening up the chat room for that. And for those of you here, if you can just come together, and we'll just discuss those. You can talk. Maybe you want to cross, or you can get closer together, whatever you prefer. But thinking about, we're going to take 3 to 5 minutes for this. This will lead us to the beginning of the workshop.
Well, I won't lie. I'm supposed to be in that room, but I came in early. But I was interested in what was going on. I generally don't know anything about research.
No, that's perfect. That's a perfect place to be. Like, I'm happy that you're here. Yeah, I know that, for myself, I consider myself a mixed methodologist, and that's really because whenever I think about a question, especially when exploring social phenomena and and working with communities, I always think that we can harness the strengths of quantitative, which is numbers, with qualitative, which is narratives and experiences, and we can merge them together to bring about a fuller story. Right? Now, I believe that we can use both of those methodologies for us to be able to create impactful research that can benefit society, that could benefit marginalized communities, underrepresented students, right? Because it allows us to be able to have both, right? Numbers cannot speak for themselves, so we need to be able to contextualize them with narratives, right? So that's what I think.
They both make the bigger picture.
Mm-hmm. Yes, exactly right. There's actually this numerically, mathematically, it's explained as 1 + 1 = 3. Mixed methods means that when you put both together, you get more than just the sum of the equal parts. There's something bigger that happens.
I kind of chose qualitative and equity-based because in my research, like I kind of see myself as like an activist, sort of, and obviously the best way to like influence activism and like be an activist is probably to do quantitative and qualitative methods at the same time, because then you're gonna be more like influential. I think you're kind of bringing both sides of the picture. And my research is like specific to like DEIJ and like LGBTQ population, so another kind of like marginalized population, and I identify like in the LGBTQ community, so like I always like to like I don't tell myself like it is what it is. Like I'm not just like interested in the research I do for like DEIJ and LGBTQ populations. Like I'm like part of the research.
Yes.
It's like the people I'm researching were like my research focuses on like secondary school students, and that's like kind of like where I saw myself like 15 years ago when I was in high school. So like the students like I'm researching, like I see myself in them.
Yeah.
So like I'm like kind of advocating for them.
I love that. I love that. That's perfect. And that's, you know, the positionality that you have that impacts even the research questions asked, right? And the outcomes that you expect for research is not just another line in your CV, but it's like, I want to create a change, right? Thank you.
Well, actually, I wrote some research paper, undergraduate or the courses I have here so far. But actually, for me, research means something I don't want to do, but I have to because of the course requirement. And so anyway, this semester, I have a research program, a research course, and just yesterday, it was the first assignment for the, I think it's kind of an outline of the research I'm going to make. And I had a hard time, and I was in the library like literally 7 hours or something, and I still haven't finished yet. So this is a very big stress for me. So I really don't know what is research, and I have no research identity, something like that.
Well, you know what? Then I'm happy that you're here. Because hopefully we'll get closer to understanding the why you're conducting research, right? And sometimes that involves a reflexive approach to be able to understand, like, why is it that we're conducting this research? So I'm hoping that these activities help. Okay?
I have a question.
Yeah.
So I know we mentioned that at least somebody mentioned that this will be uploaded on YouTube.
Mm-hmm.
How are we gonna get the link? Is it through the emails, through the
So
or?
we will add it to, the Graduate College has a YouTube channel. So we'll
Okay.
add it right to the Graduate College YouTube channel.
Okay,
So
awesome.
it's like, just Google UNLV Grad College YouTube, you should be able to find it.
Okay, cool, because I might have to switch
No,
rooms.
no,
Of course.
Yes. No, not a problem. There's a question for you.
Yes.
Are they able to then unmute themselves and share out if they want to?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, perfect, excellent. Well, do you give them like a minute to notice, or is it automatic?
Let's see. Are you ready for me to close if it is automatic? I'm just gonna test something. Okay, so they'll be returned in 60 seconds.
Okay, perfect. That way at least I don't feel like I'm rude, and you know how it is when it's automatic. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. It's been a bit since I did breakout room, but
No
it's great.
problem. Now, if anybody here wants to share, do they just speak out?
Yep, we're on this mic right now.
Does anybody here want to share any of the discussion? It's okay if you don't.
I don't know if mine's insightful enough.
You're completely fine.
Most people are coming back, but it looks like a couple conversations still going.
Perfect. How many groups do we have?
No, you're fine.
6 groups.
Welcome back, those who are making their way. Just one group is wrapping up still.
Hola, Verónica.
Hello, hello.
Hello. Hola.
Hola. Bienvenida.
Gracias.
Everybody is back now.
All right, perfect. Welcome back. Hopefully, you got a chance to even have the space to think about, you know, what do I think of myself as a researcher? Why do I do this? Why do I do this work, right? I think that when we think about even being in graduate school, there's expectation for us to conduct research. For some of us in doctoral programs, we're expected and required to actually conduct research prior to graduating. It becomes a benchmark in our program. And so therefore, I think it's just so crucial that we consider the impact of our research. And that really goes into the questions like, how do you see your role as a researcher, right? So I wanted to go and ask, is there anybody that would like to share anything that came up during their discussion group, anything that you found interesting, something that might have shocked you, if you just want to share what your research, what you think, what you consider your role as a researcher to be, I'll open that up. If you could just unmute yourself if you'd like to share.
Yeah, anyone on Zoom, please feel welcome to unmute yourself or raise your hand if you'd like to share. Or I'm watching the chat too. Ambrosia would like to share. Go ahead.
Thank you. What I said was I chose the word open-minded, and I chose that word because I feel like with mixed methodology, especially critical mixed methodology, it requires one to be open-minded to like new possibilities in research. And I also stated that I see my role as a researcher to make a positive difference in the industry by bringing to light new information through empirical evidence. And then I have definitely considered how my identity influences my research because I'm a middle school teacher. I've been in public schools, all my life, and I very much strongly have a lot of strong opinions about public school and supporting them. And so I think it's very important as a mixed methodology researcher. I know my biases and I know where I lean, so I can identify that in my research because it's so important knowing your positionality and qualitative work. So that's my input.
Thank you, Ambrosia, and thank you for representing. She's actually just a shout out to Ambrosia. She's a part of our a doctoral mixed methods dissertation group with doctoral students from all over the United States. So it's really great to have her here. So thank you, Ambrosia. And I think we have some chat.
We've got a couple of comments, yeah. So Amruta said, my group had quantitative and qualitative researchers, but no one had done mixed methods except coursework. And then Monica says, I'm still in the inquiry phase since I'm just beginning my research journey, but definitely action-oriented. And then Joseph says that he shared that my one word was intersectional because of his own identities and those of the communities who he does community embedded research with.
I love it, thank you. There's all these interconnections between research and action, right? Which is really great to see. So hopefully, well, by the time that we get done with today covering the framework, you'll be able to have some practical strategies to put your research into action, especially when you're interested in the social justice work. Thank you everybody for sharing, I really appreciate that. So like I said, I did want to gauge who here was familiar with mixed methods. I'm gonna do this quickly just because it looks like some of you have some familiarity with it. So if you do have more questions regarding mixed methods, I have plenty of resources, readings. I've had the pleasure by participating in conferences to meet some of the authors to the books that we read here that I've used for our mixed method studies, our mixed methods courses. So please feel free to reach out. This is just a brief overview, okay? So the basis of mixed methods is to integrate qualitative and quantitative methods to provide a more comprehensive understanding of a phenomenon. So you are integrating qualitative, which could be interviews, focus groups, narratives, experiences, right? Think about qualitative in that way, quantitative being numbers, statistical analysis, right? So when I use qual, think about words, quality. Quantitative, think about numbers, statistics, patterns, systems, right? So what we do with mixed methods leverages the strengths of both the qualitative and the quantitative insights to provide a more comprehensive understanding of a phenomenon. Now, when we integrate, it's not just simply like you're putting in quant and qual and you're just mixing it together and saying, hey, these were my qual findings or these were my quant findings. I've seen that happen, which is fine. But one of the main points of mixed methods is integration. And I don't know if for those of you familiar with mixed methods, that's sometimes like a big trendy word, integration. Now, when we think about integration, it's not just as a form of triangulation, which we might understand as being ways to be able to corroborate our data, validate our data, right? It goes beyond that. It also could be to expand. So you might use one approach, let's say quantitative, a survey, but then you want to expand on that by incorporating a qualitative approach, expanding on what the numbers tell you and provide a story behind the numbers, right? It could also be to find areas of divergence or contradictions. Sometimes the qual and the quant won't mix well, and that's okay. That's where sometimes we get the provocative, we get those things that maybe we get the innovative, the things that are yet to be explored, maybe variables that have not been considered. So integration allows us in mixed methods to corroborate, to expand, and to also look at points of divergences or contradictions. The three main core designs for mixed methods is the convergent, the explanatory, and the exploratory. The convergent being pretty much, this is where the point of data collection and analysis happens. So convergent means that we are gathering the quantitative and the qualitative at the same time. We're analyzing it, the results are merged, compared, and then we are interpreted based on both the qualitative and the quantitative findings. This could be, for example, let's say if you have a survey and you have open-ended questions within a survey that's has a particular scale, you're incorporating both the quant and the qual at the same time, right? This could also mean maybe you having a focus group and you have a room full of participants, and while they're doing the focus group, you also have them fill out a survey, right? So you're collecting both qualitative and quantitative data at the same time. When we have an explanatory sequential design, sequential means one follows after the other. Explanatory is starting with quantitative data. So this could be, for example, I've mentioned before, this could be a large survey, right? You start off with the quantitative data, and then you follow by trying to maybe fill in gaps, gather insights with the qualitative. And so we have quantitative first, and they're explained by the qualitative data, and that's when you have your interpretation point. Explanatory, quant, then qual. Convergence, both at the same time. Then we have exploratory, which you might have guessed it. We start with qualitative data instead of quantitative data. Qualitative data, we collect, we analyze, and it builds to a quantitative measurement. So for example, in my dissertation, I gathered qualitative data to help inform the development of a more culturally competent scale that measures research identity. And then I used that scale, I used the qualitative insights to build, to help develop an adapted model that I took from science identity. And once I had this survey that incorporated qualitative insights, I was then now able to test it by performing a series of quantitative analysis. So we have, again, convergent happening at the same time, explanatory, quant, then qual, exploratory, qual, then quant. These are the three core designs provided by Creswell and Plano-Clark. Any questions about these three designs? Feel free, please, raise your hand if there's something that you have questions for. Now, it's not as easy as these three designs. These are the three most basic designs, but we could have a multi-phase mixed method study. It's really going to be dependent on your research questions. It's going to be based on what your research is about, right? And so, for example, I have in my work, I have my initial phase starting with a qual and a quant, a convergent design that happens at the same time. Now, please note that the nomenclature here used, like the capital versus the lowercase qual or quant, means the emphasis that I'm placing on a specific approach. So when I look at my convergent first phase, my kind of like my pilot, my preliminary phase, I placed a greater emphasis on the qual, even though I collected quant as well. I placed a greater emphasis on my qual because my qualitative insights were going to be used to build my quantitative survey, right? So I am letting the reader know there's a heavier emphasis on my qual in this convergent design. It led to my phase 2, where I now administered a survey, my quantitative survey, and I conducted a CFA, a confirmatory factor analysis, to validate my scale, which I am now using to have a multiple regression. So you see how I have a convergent mixed methods design that leads to a quantitative to another quantitative analysis. So this does not fit into the 3 options that we have for the core designs, but you see how now you can start thinking, formulating based on the needs of your study, what steps do I need to take forward to create a procedure for data collection and analysis that works for my research questions. Now, I'll tell you that as a grad student, there's always a big emphasis on publishing. And I'm a believer, obviously, we are working in the system where we must publish, right? That's a way for us to be able to disseminate our work. But one of the things about CMMR is that it's to create impactful research, not just another line in the CV, but to really create an impact in our societies, with the communities that we work with, right? And so understanding that, and yet also being a part of a system where you need to publish, I would say that mixed methods also allows you to be able to publish your work piece by piece. So for example, at ARA, so I'm presenting in a couple months, I'm presenting the first phase of my work. I will then work on publishing that, and then leading to the quantitative, where I can go ahead and publish yet another piece, but it's all built on the same work that I'm doing, right? So now it's my research, something that I am invested in, something that I'm passionate about, and I'm able to publish at the same time, which meets a lot of the requirements that we have as graduate students, right? So just ideas there in terms of how you can use mixed methods for some of the requirements that we have as grad students. Don't let this overwhelm you. It's really just my procedures, and this really goes to show you when you conduct any type of study, whether it be qualitative or quantitative, but especially when you're conducting mixed methods, you have to allow your reader to be able to follow you and understand your procedures and why you're doing what you're doing. So for example, here, even though this pre-data collection and integration is usually not included in procedures, I think that this was a very important phase that I felt the need to include this in my procedures and for my mixed methods research. Pláticas are like informal conversations that we used sometimes with communities of color, and it's a way of being able to really frame and ask the reasons like why I'm conducting this research. What should I be looking at even before I start collecting data? And it's through informal conversations. Sometimes my conversations relating to the work with research identity in graduate students meant talking to other graduate students, like, hey, what are some of the hardships? What are some of the challenges? What are some of the things that we can do to provide us more supportive environment, right? And so these conversations, although they're not like a part of the formal quote unquote research, they really framed some of my entry points in research. And so I just thought it was important to put there. Like I mentioned, I had the convergent design where you collected the qual and the quant together, right? And this was using a smaller sample just to help me be able to conduct a thematic analysis that then informed my modified research identity scale. Then I used this modified scale based on the qualitative findings to inform my quant procedures. This is a way of keeping myself in a way organized in terms of what each step is for. I'm not just doing it just because like, hey, I just want to throw in a qualitative piece or a quantitative piece because it just seems cool. It's strategic. There's a reason why. And I need to be able to explain it, especially for you, if you want to pitch your mixed method study to your committee, they're going to ask you why. They're going to say, okay, how is this answering your research question? So just start thinking about, you know, even if you're going into your comprehensive exams, or if you're going into your dissertation proposal, right? You want to be able to make it very clear, and the use of diagrams really helps, especially like I mentioned when we're talking about mixed methods research. There's this thing called the paradigm wars, which is the qual versus quant. that existed, they say existed maybe, during the 80s, 90s, paradigm wars, the qual against quant, but I would say that sometimes it's not necessarily a war, but when we are working with individuals that have conducted all their research just using quantitative or just using qualitative, they might say like, hey, why are you doing a mixed methods research, right? And you're gonna have to explain it to them, right? And so just note that you need to be able to really clearly communicate your rationale for using mixed methods. Please feel free to stop me at any time, like I mentioned. I'm almost gonna stop talking and we'll be able to get a little bit more activities done here. So then, when I actually came from the teaching and learning with multicultural education, and when I came into educational psychology, I was trying to figure out how is it that some of the critical theories, approaches, and lenses that we were using in multicultural education, how is it that we could, it felt like we could use those to be able to really impact research in a way that is more culturally competent, is specific for working with all communities, especially communities of color. And so I really began to think of like, how can we in a way, like almost like inject criticality into this mixed methods framework, which you see to your left. Now to your right, we have the critical mixed methods research and approach. These arrows will make a little bit more sense when I cover it, but we really go into more than just determining whether a mixed method design is appropriate or your rationale or just simply collecting data, analyzing data, to figuring out how we can actually incorporate critical inquiry and reflection in every step of the research process. So that's what we're really gonna be, it's gonna be the bulk of what we're looking at today. So I just put it simply here, criticality and reflexivity are core elements of CMMR. It emphasizes the iterative and emergent nature of the research processes driven by the needs of the study, demanding a strategic and deliberate shift in how knowledge is reproduced. Critical inquiry is an approach to research and analysis that involves questioning assumptions, examining power structures, and challenging dominant narratives to uncover deeper truths and promote social change. Traumas emphasizes that critical inquiry involves rigorous examination and transformation, not mere critique, but highlighting its role in producing meaningful and actionable insights. This requires more than theoretical alignments, more than just theoretically what does it mean to criticalize research, but it actually means being able to also provide the guidance and support to conduct this type of research. We need to be able to offer spaces such as these, where we can ask questions like, what does it mean to enter into marginalized communities, right? What does it mean to, different ways of knowing? How can we incorporate maybe emic perspectives? How can we incorporate storytelling? How can we incorporate songs, right? Maybe for Mexican communities, it might be corridos or pláticas. So very important to consider multiple ways of knowing, right? And you'll see this throughout the process. So like I mentioned, there's 11 phases and I would not be able to cover them. I'm gonna try to summarize all of them, but I really want us to focus in on some. But if you'd like a little bit more of a more detailed explanation of the phases, I'll provide you a citation for that. But the phases start off with critical self-reflection. The main purpose is to really examine your identity and positionality and understanding how they influence the research process. There is this imaginary distinction between the researcher and the research that we conduct. And we're used as vessels to be able to conduct research, whether it be a subjective stance to a Likert scale and figuring out what is less likely versus what is most likely, right? And you having to pretty much make an inference. And this is called when you're in a way quantizing data. Even when you're working with quant data, there's still a level of qualitative subjectivity that is involved even in that, right? So thinking about us being used as the researcher who's in charge of asking the questions, what articles we're citing, how we collect the data, in what order do we collect the data. We're active in this process. And so the main thing to focus on is how can we be transparent about that process? Because it is happening, but how can we be transparent about it, right? Instead of pretending it's not there. Second, your theoretical and epistemological framework. So that's the lenses that you use. If you don't look, I don't know how many of you have sometimes, I know, you've gotten a car and all of a sudden you start noticing that, all the cars that look like your car, or, and you're like, I never noticed that before, right? And so I see it as theoretical, the theoretical lens that you use for your study is pretty much putting on a lens where you're just like, you know what, I'm gonna be looking, you might be taking a grounded approach, I'm gonna look at everything, but I'm gonna specifically look at maybe some of the challenges that graduate students, they encounter. Well, theory allows us to put lenses in a larger scope. It allows us to be able to look for specific phenomena, center-specific narratives, right? Where we're like, okay, we're gonna use this theory to inform our research. If we don't put those lenses on, sometimes we won't see it. And sometimes not using critical perspectives means that we could possibly be ignoring some of the things that are, a part of individual social realities. So very important to think about that. You have key questions also, just so you know, a part of the reflexive part of this also is that you can ask yourself basic questions. It doesn't require more equipment, or it's nothing expensive. It's just questions that we can ask ourselves. We can ask ourselves as we're proceeding towards the research process, right? Simple questions, like for example, for the diverse and collaborative research team, it's who is a part of my research? Like, who do I consider as a co-creator in this knowledge? If I'm going into communities and they're the experts at being at being a part of their community, if they're the experts in their culture, if they're the experts, whatever it is that you're examining, right? Then seeing them as part of the research team might be important. You see this like in action research or community-based research, right? So for strategic design and rationale and selection, like I mentioned, I know that in the regular mixed methods design, we have design rationale, like why am I using quant and qual? But in critical mixed methods, we're putting them together, the quant and the qual, strategically for social justice aims. So in the example, and I just bring my research as an example because it's sometimes easier to understand when you have an example, I realized that I had to integrate qualitative insights before the quantitative survey because I realized that as a researcher of color, there might be things that were missing from this researcher identity scale. And that made me strategically place qualitative before any quantitative analysis in order for me to make sure to center participant voices for the purpose of creating scales that can try to really capture the experiences of graduate students of color. So I strategically placed one after another, right? And I have to explain that in my work. Data collection and exchange. It's not just a factory. We're not just going into communities and extracting information. How can we enter these spaces, build a report? What are they getting in exchange? If they're giving me knowledge, am I willing to say, okay, is there an intervention? Is there a workshop? Is there something that I could do for the community, right? Looking at the analysis, I'm gonna go over a little bit. I'm gonna just very briefly analysis. I'm gonna look at how we could be criticalized both qualitative and quantitative analysis by using something, I don't know if you've all heard of it, but quant crit, which is pretty much based on how numbers don't speak for themselves. And we could also use cultural intuition. Cultural intuition is the sense sometimes that you have, having the experiences that you have to question data. Does that really reflect community expertise, right? So in the analysis portion, you can employ a variety of tools to critically analyze data, validate findings. Do we go back to our communities and do we say, hey, is what I am interpreting, does this make sense in terms of like what community expertise tells us based on your experiences, right? Is this what this variable is really measuring it? Did we operationalize it correctly, right? So going back to the community to be able to validate data in addition to the various qualitative and quantitative validation procedures as well. Strategic integration, again, that really ties into strategic design, because if you notice with my procedures, I designed the study in a specific way, the mixed method phases in a specific way, for me to be able to have these points of integration that are happening at specific times. For example, phase 1, we have an integration of qualitative insights that are informing the quantitative. Now, this scale is the result of the integration of qualitative and quantitative. They're put together. That's an integration point. Integration just does not happen when we gather the qual and the quant data. We separately analyze, we separately report findings, and there's like 2 strands that are somehow in one study, and it's a mixed method study. Integration could be at multiple points. Boozy and Hitchcock, they have a book on integration, and they really go into various paradigms of where integration can happen. It could be the fact that I'm studying self-efficacy with a CMMR framework, and I'm integrating 2 various theories together to help the study. It could also mean that in my mixed method study, I have a qual research question, I have a quant research question, and I have a mixed methods research question. I'm integrating both qual and quantitative aspects, even in the research questions, right? So this is called a fuller integration. I have a lot of resources if that's something that you're interested in as well. Interpretation, again, very much close to validation, is the way that we interpret information is also based on positionality, right? The biases, the things that assumptions that we may have that lead us to interpret findings in a specific way. Reporting, we report findings in a way that highlight divergent perspective and challenge systemic injustices. This could be through counter stories. This could be through anti-deficit perspectives that we're able to report and are willing to say, okay, I'm conducting this research. I want to be able to not just find what is significant, like in a quantitative study, right? This is what's significant, and this makes my research valid and empirical and publishable, right? But it also means reporting maybe the outliers, reporting the dissonance, the chaos, because that allows researchers to start to look into it instead of research being this neatly categorized set of findings that just make us feel better because we found significance. Sometimes breakthroughs and innovation are brought forth by the things that don't make sense, but allow other scholars to be able to start looking into these areas, these domains, and start exploring. That's how we begin to change research. That's how we create impactful research. It's not just by, preaching to the choir. Then leading finally to critical action and social justice. And later on, you'll see that I connect even my phase number 4, strategic design, with phase 11, critical action and social justice, because the way that we design our study is for the purpose of equity, right? Having that at the forefront of who we are in terms of as a researcher conducting this work is important. So this is not one phase leads to the other. It's, like I mentioned, it's emergent, it's iterative, it's evolving. So don't look at this framework as, okay, phase 1, now I can go to phase 2. No, they're continuously, it's more organic than that. So that's a brief summary of all the phases. So we're gonna get into just a few of the phases. Any questions right now on anything that has been covered? I'm not doing that of an amazing job, so please feel free to ask questions, all right? All right. So CMMR. It goes beyond integration to challenge power structures and promote social justice. So hopefully from covering this, what you can see is that we, as a scholar of color, I thought of how can I use mixed methods as a way to be able to promote social justice. It seems that if this methodological approach, this research process lends itself for me to be able to harness and leverage the strengths of qual and quant to help the very communities that I'm working with, right? I'll tell you this from experience, I was working on a grant and we had surveys and we had rich qualitative data, but when it was time to ask for funding, we got funding, I think it was the second time we asked for funding, but I felt that my grant submission could have been strengthened by me using quantitative data a little bit more. And I thought of, that really prompted me to be like, as a researcher, coming like again from teaching and learning, I was very much of a qual person, just like, you know, sometimes, you know, some of you might be from quant as well, but I felt that in order for me to do justice to the communities that I was working with, I don't have to be an expert, but I would have to at least be versatile enough as a researcher to have both qual and quant under my belt, so that there is no research question that I shy away from, right? It doesn't mean I'm gonna conduct the structural equation modeling and that's, you know, I have to do that in order for me to do this work. But what about being able to just look for patterns, systems, conducting a larger sample, something that maybe can convince state agencies to be able to provide funding for my study? I wanted the ability to be able to have that. Now that's just Monica telling you what I thought. Doesn't mean it's the right way, but that's just as a researcher, how I began to be intrigued with the use of mixed methods and the potential that it has to conduct this type of work. So, how do you think we can integrate multiple methods for studying social justice issues? And just think about this question, even within your own research. Put this into your own research. Is there a way that we could use qual and quantitative, especially for those that, you know, have this initial, I think you shared it in the very beginning in terms of research, wanting to do transformative work, equity work, right? How can you use, and that's just something for you to think about. I mean, you know, we don't have to share out, you can share out if you want to, but think about that. How can we really begin to think of how we can use qual and quant research for social justice aims within your own research? Thank you, Monica. Use current contemporary voices and experiences. Yes, very much so. Either in the explanatory or in the exploratory, we could see how highlighting the experiences of participants can allow us to be able to explain the larger scale phenomenon. Thank you, Jillian. Yes. Whether it be to inform the development of a scale, whether it be to explain a scale, whether it be a part of your somewhere in your multi-phase, right? It allows us to be able to translate effectively into practice. What can we actually do that is not just a number, but how can we translate our work to actual real experiences of the participants that we work with? If we are trying to, let's say in the quantitative field, if we're trying to operationalize a specific variable, and validity means we're exploring what we seek to explore. We're trying to understand and examining what we're trying to examine. How are we really doing that if the scales that we're using are short of capturing the lived realities of the very participants that it has in its study? I'm quickly gonna go over this so we can get into, thank you for that, Amrita. Cross-validation of findings, that's the corroboration, right? So I know we've already covered a lot of positionality, so I'm not gonna really go over all of this, but this is more for your reference. But just remember that in the context of research, positionality refers to the way a researcher's identity, background, and social location shape their perspectives, interactions, and influence on the research process. So putting it in the context of research, this is what positionality, as you know, we're defining it, means. I mentioned it earlier, but it really challenges the traditional objectivity. Zubedi and Bonilla Silva talk about how they challenge the artificial distinction between an analysis and the analyst, acknowledging the personal, academic, and professional experience, how they shape the research process. Down there, I have a little quote from them. I think it's pretty powerful. So cultural intuition, like I mentioned before, is this powerful tool that incorporates your experiential, historical, personal, and collective awareness into research. The reason where you're like, scratching my head, this doesn't make sense. That's not the way I experienced it, or there seems to be something missing there. Not just based on maybe your racial identity, but maybe your professional experiences. It could be as a teacher. I think, Roger, you said a middle school teacher. We have theory and we have, there might be conclusion and evidence, but as a teacher, you could be like, there's something that's missing when we're talking about maybe the school culture. Have we ever considered this specific element? And so that allows us to be able to use our cultural intuition to scratch our heads, and say, okay, what is missing here? Or what does not reflect the realities of participants? And we have personal experience also here defined by Perez Ubed. So I wanted to give you an example. This was my positionality statement in my dissertation. I really want to say that why did I get into even examining research identity? Well, if you skip over to the last few sentences, I say a pivotal moment during my graduate studies occurred when my advisor acknowledged me and encouraged me to pursue a research career. They saw something in me that I could not see in myself. At that time, I struggled to envision myself as a researcher, prompting me to reflect on the reasons behind this uncertainty and sought to explore my own research identity. As I spoke with fellow students, whether at conferences or through pláticas, that is intimate informal conversations to establish relationships and co-construct knowledge, I noticed patterns which piqued my interest that led to the inspiration of this study. So it was my very own experiences and how I saw others as researchers, but not myself. Like other people conduct research, right? But not people that look like me. I began to think about like, wait a minute, like why do I think that? Is it a lack of representation? Why don't I see myself as that? Am I not competent? Am I not able to? What do I need to do to become a researcher? And that led to the inspiration of my dissertation. How could I leave that as part of the story when it's interweaved as part of my study? I can't leave that off. I have plenty of students that tell me like, sometimes they've gone into specific research fields because of experiences they had in their families or because of the things that they went through. How could we separate that from our study? That's the heart of our study, our positionality. So now we're gonna do a quick positionality check. I want you to think about what intersectional identities do I bring as a researcher, and how does my research positionality and posture influence my research questions and interest? Okay, so a part of one of the recommendations that we have a list of tables in some of the work that we do, really provide recommendations in terms of things that you can do. And this actually, when you're talking about like journaling, this could actually be a part of your methodologies when you're presenting your work, and you can put it in your appendix, but it's actually a way of you being able to provide validity to your study. So just so you know, this is actually a part of the research process. But I want you to think about what intersectional identities do I bring as a researcher, and how does my research positionality and posture influence my research questions? I don't want you to necessarily share this with us, but write this down. So you're gonna take about 5 minutes to write down a positionality statement. It doesn't mean that this is gonna be published, and it's for you. This might just be the very beginning of the space that you need to be able to write this. It's a lot more prevalent now in research too. So if you could just do me a favor, and even if it's just words that you want to write down, let's kind of work on that. So I'll leave the next 5 minutes for us to work on a positionality check. And from there on, we're going to move to our more of our analysis. All right, you can write your concluding thoughts here. I remember it's really just the beginning. I hope that I can hear back from you, and there's a point where you could tell me, hey, this is the beginning of my positionality statement that I included in my study, right? I've also had students that sometimes tell me like, hey, is my positionality statement, is it right? And there's no such thing as a right or a wrong, right? It really depends on what you feel comfortable sharing. But sometimes they've had me look at their statement. And so if you're ever like, hey, what is this, you know, if you want to send it over, I always meet with students one-on-one as well. So I'll be busy for the next month preparing for my dissertation, but use me as a resource, okay? Any part of your study that you have. All right, so key takeaways, it's an ongoing process. Your positionality statement is not just one phase and you're done with it and you keep going. It's something that is throughout the process, throughout the research process, and it's good for you to acknowledge it. You know, as thinking about ethics in research, it's important for us to be transparent about it, be aware about it. We are interpreting data. Our research findings can be published and read. They can be used in courts. They can be used to provide evidence. It's important that we take our role as researchers with that level of seriousness. Phase 2, what I'm going to do is I have specific articles that really go into, for example, providing a brief summary of critical feminist, critical race, and intersectional theory. I know some of you, I think one person said that you consider yourself an intersectional researcher, right? So I'm pretty sure Crenshaw is in your literature review. But it's important for us to challenge the traditional paradigms by incorporating these theoretical frameworks which allow us, like I mentioned before, to have the lenses to be able to understand context, to be able to understand and be strategic about what we're looking at when we are working with communities of color. We also have, for example, Quant Crit. That's one of the ones that I wanted to highlight just because it's not new, but it's maybe in the last 5-10 years that we've looked at how we can bring criticality into quantitative analysis. And I would say that just because you're conducting qualitative data, that doesn't make it critical either. You have to be able to use these attempts to break through assumptions in all approaches, right? So this is important because this could be a theoretical framework that you can use if you're doing quantitative analysis within your mixed methods study as well. And that is that the centrality of racism is not readily amenable to quantification. Numbers are not neutral, they need to be interrogated, right? Units and forms of analysis must be critically evaluated. Variables, right? Operationalizing of constructs, latent variables. Voice and insight are vital. Data cannot speak for itself. But we can also use statistical analysis in emancipatory ways. We could take them, some would say as like you could use the master's tools also to be able to use it for social justice. A couple of questions you might want to ask yourself, and maybe quantitative is more of your research approach, is how can we question the objectivity and scientific assumptions of statistical analysis? And can quantitative data be used in emancipatory ways? Some people might tell you it's not. I've heard it. There's no way you could use numbers when numbers have been used to oppress people, when numbers have been a part of a eugenic movement, when statistics was created by those that sought to prove that certain cultural groups were trying to dehumanize them. I understand that, and we have to be aware of those conversations that have taken place. But how can we use them in emancipatory ways? If we're going to conduct critical mixed methods research, we need to be able to ask those questions. These are some practical recommendations of what you can do with when thinking about your theoretical and epistemological framework. This is in here, this next slide is an actual example of someone that uses Quant Crit to examine what a papelito holds, the importance of a papelito for communities of color. A papelito means a little paper. So they're using that to say the value of a degree, the value of your diploma. In this study, they examined secondary data findings of a quantitative survey, a scale, that was used to examine the value of post-secondary degrees and occupational prestige for Latina and Latinos communities through a Quant Crit approach. Now, here just to put it in simple, just to summarize this, they pretty much said that the value of a degree for the Latina community wasn't as valuable as for their white counterparts, because they did not make as much money. It was mostly based on the positions that they hold, money that they made. It was based on those specific criteria, right? So, Uber and her colleagues scratched their head, right? Again, that cultural intuition, like, wait a minute, this doesn't seem right, that this term value is being measured by these materialistic components. And so when they conducted qualitative data, they realized that value for communities of color does not just mean how much money you make, but they realized that a lot of these people, graduates, had used their degree as a way to be able to show their communities that, hey, I can make it. If I can make it, you can make it. There's a more of an intrinsic value to this degree, to this papelito, that wasn't captured beforehand, right? They were going into health and service-related industries. They were using their degree to create an impact that was ongoing in their communities. And so just by using this this theoretical framework within their study, they were able to unpack a lot that might have been left unshifted and neatly presented. So it goes to show you the importance of having a theoretical framework that is critical. So for you all as well, I want you to think about knowledge and research, right? I want you to, again, this is going back to I'm gonna call it our little research journal here that we have going. But maybe for the next, well, I don't know, this might be something that we'll share the slides. So what I'm gonna do is I'm not gonna spend too much time in this, just because I wanna be able to cover some of the phases later on in the process. But I want you to maybe give yourself as a little reflection activity. You'll be able to have access to these slides. I want you to think about knowledge in itself. And hopefully this helps us to be able to really look at phase 1, positionality, phase 2, critical epistemological frameworks, that then impact who do we consider to be a part of our research team. And that influences how we collect data. They're all intertwined. When you walk through that CMMR guiding framework, one builds on another. If I see that I center different ways of knowing, right? That'll be reflected in my theoretical framework. That will impact who's a part of my research team, who's listed as a co-author when I disseminate findings, right? That research team will then impact how I go into communities and collect the data. That'll impact the kind of questions that I ask, because if it's based on the communities themselves, it'll impact my research questions, which my research questions are linked to my design as a mixed method, in my mixed methods design, right? And because it's linked to social justice, you see how we have this research process that is really interconnected. I went through 3 and 5 already, I'm sorry. But that's where you see the interconnection between those first 3 phases. For phase 5, I would say there's importance of cultural humility. Approaching research with humility and sensitivity it's essential. Addressing power imbalances. We have to craft an inclusive study. It just does not happen. We have to be intentional with our design choices. When we work with communities, when we get their input, right? It really shapes how we craft these studies, who's at the table. In phase 6, when we talk about our analysis, we can use cultural intuition or quant crit to begin to unpack secondary data, survey findings, qualitative findings. And now we can use phase 7 as our integration to provide a more socially relevant story that strategically follows what we implemented or what we sought to implement in our research design. There's a citation for the Onwuegwusi and Hitchcock, which I think you'd find pretty interesting. If you want to, UNLV, I know database has the book available. It's an ebook. Kind of hard to move around because you have to go from almost like page by page, but it's there. It doesn't allow you to download specific chapters. I guess that's what I'm trying to say. One key thing I mentioned to you, integration. I wanted to spend a little bit more time on integration for the next few minutes, just because I think it's critical to think about how we're organizing our data. I mentioned already how integration is used to corroborate, elaborate, initiate further exploration, talk about divergences, contradictions. I wanted to provide an example that I just shared actually with our mixed methods doctoral group, and that's by Shunenbun. And you see here how we can have an integration of claims. So I just screenshotted this example, but for example, you might have a qualitative portion. You see you have observations, which is a part of the qualitative work. You might have interviews, you may have ethnographic notes, whatever it might be, and you have specific claims that you make. These claims, for example, let's say there's a qualitative and a quantitative, you make these integrated claims between, let's say, qual and a quant, or a qual and a qual within the larger mixed methods framework. You have this integrated claim, and then you can explain how in integration, the qual and the qual help to confirm the separate claims. You could also say how maybe in the mixed methods where you had the qualitative methodologies with the counts of children's photographs, you could say how these two claims are integrated. And you see that with the comment in IC7, right? And then you see that in the column to the right, how that also confirmed. But you might find a contradiction. In IC9 and in IC11, you might see that one contradicts the other, and there's a need for further exploration. You can actually go down this table. You could have a table like that for yourself, and in your mixed methods, talk about your qualitative claims, quantitative claims. You could integrate the claims and make it very clear how you either contradicted, confirmed, or how it corroborated both data sets, right? Now, what's really interesting about this article is that they talk about the meta framework and how when you integrate all these claims, you have a larger conceptual understanding of a phenomenon, and that is a meta framework. So if you're further down right now in your research, this is something that you might have, you might do further down the road, but I wanted to provide this because if you're thinking about how to actually report your integrated results, this could be an example of how to easily do that. So phase 11 I have really in highlighted with strategic design, with your analysis and your integration, because critical action and social justice should be the aim of critical mixed methods, is to provide a transformative and equitable look into using research for the communities that we work with the students that we're working with, the families, whatever that may be. And so phase 11 also in that article that we'll be sharing also has practical guidelines and recommendations of how you can do that. Like I mentioned, I could only really highlight some phases, but hopefully this helps to just initiate the conversations that we can have, especially when relating to research that we conduct and what a process is, depending on how we look at it, depending on how we view our role as a researcher. I'm hoping that this work with Dr. Bendixen, that Dr. Bendixen and I have been working on, really helps you all to look at how we can use reflexivity and critical inquiry in the research process. And you're not alone. I started this process back in 2019, and this phase was built phase by phase. like I mentioned, I'm defending soon, and so I made multiple mistakes. There's lessons learned, IRBs. If you have a question about how to practically do any of this, let me know. Still very fresh in my mind. So with that, I just want to thank you all for taking the time, first of all, to even think about how to become more of a critical researcher. That goes to show the intent of the work that you're doing. And I want to say, keep going. It might not be a road that others have treaded, but you're here. And that to me it speaks volumes. So with that, I want to open up the floor for any questions that you may have. How about we start here?
Anyway, it's so informative and I have no question. I just have to organize it later afterwards.
Take some time to digest it. It's so funny because an hour and a half is like nothing. I could talk about this every single phase. I've done this into a 3-part workshop series as well, so it's not just so much information, right? But I did want to leave my information there because I realized that you may have questions later on and you might be like, okay, or when you actually are thinking about conducting the research and you get to a point where you're like, well, how can I enter this phase, or how can I incorporate criticality into my own work? So please feel free to email me. Like I mentioned, the next month I devoted to holding the doctoral dissertation group. And that's hopefully something that is ongoing and something that Ambrosia is actually looking into continuing on. But after that, I'll be happy to meet you. If you were going to ARA, we could chat as well. You could email me. You're not alone in this process. Anything else? How about questions in the chat? Are there any questions?
I have a question.
Yeah.
I was wondering if when you were trying to publish some of your work, were you finding yourself like pigeonholed to certain journals because of, I think some of the pushback they would give is like you're not being subjective in your research. Like that's why you're like a lot with critical research, right? You're not letting the work speak for itself. You're kind of coming in with a point you want to make before the research, I guess is what they kind of try to say, right? So I guess your experience at countering that narrative that you're not being subjective, or I guess it's not the goal necessarily, but if that pushed you to certain journals and certain other journals would avoid your work because of that, I guess, fear or criticism they would give to that work.
Yeah, definitely. And you're gonna, like I mentioned, you're gonna get pushback sometimes from both qual and quant. I came from even qual where it was sometimes, I don't know if you remember me posing those questions about like how statistics have been used to oppress us. Monica, why are you using this? Why are you going from having this critical multicultural perspective, and how can you be using that to incorporate quant, right? And then quant may be saying, hey, this is not true research because it's qualitative. The paradigm wars, I say, it's not something that's from the past. Sometimes you still see it embedded into even the way that we conduct research. And so you really need to be able to, just like when you're choosing a mixed methods design and you're saying, this is the rationale behind it, not everything is gonna come from a place of where there's cultural intuition involved. Not everything's gonna come from a place where you're using a specific theoretical framework. But what I would say is, just like if you were to choose mixed methods and you have to have a rationale behind it, have a rationale for why you're using the theoretical framework that you're using. And don't be shy, don't shy away from conversations relating to how the presence of the researcher and what they bring to the research process is there. And it's not only found by some scholars, but by multiple scholars. There's multiple resources for that. So I would say stay true to your research. And I mentioned it beforehand, we are operating under a system that sometimes requires for us to have to publish. Different tier journals, right? All of those are things that we're gonna have to navigate as graduate students. But what I would say is just don't forget the why to your research and stay true to that. Don't get pigeonholed into doing I'm not gonna say critical work, but don't get pigeonholed into like, well, you have to study participants of color, or you have to work certain communities, or you have to do this. Research is nobody else will be able to conduct the research that you can conduct. So ask yourself, and that's one of the things that I really prompt students to do. It's like, ask yourself why you're conducting mixed methods, why critical mixed methods. It's not for everyone, but when you do choose it, you want to be able to select it and be authentic, provide authentic research, because we haven't gone this far for us to just continue to recycle papers. I hope that answers your question. Very good question, thank you. So thank you everybody for your time today, and if you have any questions, feel free to reach out and the slides will be made available to you. So thank you again for your time and have a great day.